Today we are going to walk through the Explore Corn Lab provided by Kansas Corn STEM. All right, hello, my name is Christopher Remmich. I'm from Garden City High School and I'm a lead teacher for Kansas Corn Seed to STEM program. And today we are actually going to look at the Explore Corn Lab. Now this is kind of the first introductory lab for students right here that may not have really any preconception of the crop itself or even its characteristics, its uses, or how it's grown or planted. So yes, again, this is the Explore Corn Lab. And today's goals that we're going to look at, okay, we want to introduce students to corn, right? We want to look at that history of corn, the characteristics, the uses, how we plant and when we plant it. We want to discuss the growth stages of corn. We're going to see corn emerge from the ground, called emergence. We're going to look at the vegetative or growing stage of corn, and then the mature reproductive stages of corn as well. And then thirdly, we're going to actually dissect an ear of corn and look at the characteristics of that ear of corn and its kernels. And the last one that we'll leave you with is we're going to discuss the leaf collar method in which we're actually dissecting a corn plant with that. Okay? So, beginning, usually what I do to start out this lab is I like to play some kind of game. You know, it's you got people sitting in groups of like 3, 4, or 5, and you want them to get to know each other. And one thing too, these are just like 6 questions that we have, and you can do it in a Kahoot form. I have it included here in the Kansas Corn's PowerPoint as well. But you want to kind of use this as a way of getting background information. How much do your kids really know about corn? Plus, it's just kind of a quick 6 questions, pretty fun to go through. And let's go ahead and begin. Like I said, there is a Kahoot for that. So question number 1, name 2 of the 4 basic types of corn. Okay. And then what we have is the answer to that is your dent corn, flint, popcorn, and sweet corn. So yeah, any 2 of those would be good. How long has corn been around? So if we look at that, our answer for that one is going to be between 7,000 and 9,000 years. Started or developed first in central Mexico, kind of evolved from the wild grass known as teosinte. And the kind of fun fact that I never realized is, yeah, sweet corn, the ones that we humans consume, is actually wasn't developed until like the 1780s, or sorry, 1780 there. So it's relatively recent, and that happened up, I think, in New York around there, where the Iroquois Indians in 1779 actually brought the sweet corn over to one of the first European settlers over in that area. So kind of a neat story there. How many kernels are on the average ear of corn? And we would see that the answer for that is between 600 to 800. And we can do a lot of fancy math with our ear of corn dissection to actually narrow that down on the particular ear of corn that you have. Question number 4, about how many corn plants can grow on an acre of land? And this one's pretty fascinating too, 22,000 to 35,000. And that's a big number that people realize, but the one thing to also remember about this is no other food source, okay, can produce that much biomass in that amount of space that we know of. So very versatile, very abundant. Question number 5, the majority of grown corn is used for what purpose? Now, a lot of people are probably going to say human consumption. We know we're eating it. Canned sweet corn, right? Cream corn, sweet corn, things like that. And if we look at it, the answer is actually livestock feed. Now, about 10% of corn is used for human consumption, and over 60% goes to livestock feed. So feeding cattle, little piggies, and chickens. And it's kind of interesting to know that we grow a little bit over 60% of our food to feed other food. I always kind of find that kind of interesting. And then how much does a pirate pay for an ear of corn? Now this is kind of a little fun joke here. And they pay about, you know, $1 an ear. So if we look right there. All right, so that's a really good introductory, kind of just a quick icebreaker to get some background knowledge out of your kiddos with that. And you can actually look at on our next slide here, on slide 16, you can see that we can use other questions here to get the discussion going. Like, ask your kids actually about the growing process, right? Are there stages to corn? Have they seen it when it's really small or really big? And what do they notice when it's really small or big in those? We can see how do you harvest the corn? When do you harvest corn? And then we have a lot of those questions in there as well that we just discussed. So it's a good way to kind of just get the discussion going. And then what I usually turn to my students to is I bring this Introduction to Corn article, right? The Explore Corn article that you guys can see right here. Now, this is just a quick, nice introduction, and as we kind of can see here, it goes through what we just kind of talked about, that corn is a grass native to Central America. It happened about 7,000 to 9,000 years ago. Native American tribes shared their knowledge of corn with the European settlers that came over. And then we kind of get into here, as we talked about, 9% of all corn used is to produce food for humans, cornmeal, cooking oils. We also looked at down here, corn is pollinated by wind and is typically planted in 30-inch rows. So we talk about how corn is planted. And then down here in the last paragraph, we talk about a little bit more about how corn is planted and developed. We talk about fertilizers. We also talk about how really you don't really want to start planting corn until the ground is about 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So we get the maximum amount of energy into growing our plants. And we don't want them to freeze, right? So this is a really cool article to kind of give your kids. And generally what I like to do is have our students actually read this independently. And they can use 2 different colors of highlighters. And one color they can actually go through here and they can look at all the, we want them to actually look at what are the cool facts, right? What is interesting to them? And then use another colored highlighter to actually highlight things that they maybe want to know more about. Okay, so they're kind of actively reading this Introduction to Corn. And then you're going to bring the kids together back into their groups, and they're going to choose some of their favorite facts or information from the Explore Corn introductory article. And what we want them to do is you can provide them with a whiteboard or a big piece of butcher paper, and each student will want to actually draw out a picture of one of these facts that they found in the article. Now, they can't use any words. It has to be a picture-based. And you can give them about 10 to 15 minutes to do this. Nothing too great or big. It's just kind of a sketch drawing thing. And then right at the end, bring them together as a class and actually go group by group and have them explain one of the pictures. And whatever fact that is given by a group cannot be used by any group afterwards. So it's one and done with that. And it's really fun because you get some pretty crazy drawings. You really find out which students are artistic and which ones are not so much. But usually they have a lot of fun with that. So that's our Introduction to Corn. And one other thing I want to kind of look at right here is, on the next slide, we do provide another Kahoot for that. It has 12 questions spanning over this Explore Corn article. And if we look at this too, right here on the right side of that slide, you can see that we have some reflection questions. What are those main, what is the main information that you wanted your students to get from this article or this introduction? Again, we looked at what are some uses for corn: human consumption, livestock feed, nylon fibers, we go in with that, ethanol production, right? Plastics, bioplastics and stuff. How long has corn been around and when did it originate? Yeah, we talked about that. How many kernels are on an ear of corn, right? And how many corn plants can grow on an acre? What percentage is used for human consumption? And what should ground temperature be when planting corn? We talked about that 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And if you want some more information, we have another really good lab called the Growing Degree Days in here that really goes deep into that, and you're doing a lot of cool graphing and data analysis with that as well. All right, so that was kind of an introduction to corn with your students here. Now, really the rest of this Explore Corn Lab is broken down into 3 different parts right here. The first one is going to be about the corn growth cycle, or the corn stages. Right here, then we're going to look at the Explore an ear of corn, and then we'll dissect a corn plant as well. So the first one right here, the lesson 1, is we're going to look at the growth stages of corn. Now, there is a student worksheet on here, and with this one, this is kind of a neat activity where you can use kind of as a pre-lab. You can hand this to your students and ask them to kind of do a web quest, go and explore on the internet here. We actually use the website, the DuPont Pioneer websites for this. And as you can see on the right here of this slide, we can see that there's 3 different links that you can take them to. One is kind of the overview of the stages of the corn, just a quick thing there. And then we have another link that goes straight to the vegetative, way more in detail on the vegetative or growth stages of corn. And then another one that goes really deeply into the reproductive stages of corn growth. And those are the links there that students can go through. And if we look at that right here, that is these worksheets that we have right here. This is found on student worksheets 2 and student worksheets 3 and 4, okay? So that first one right here, this is the first link, that kind of overview of stages of corn. And really, they're showing you these stages, VE, V1, V2, V3, R1, through and through. And we have other stages right here, VE to V1 to V3. Now, I know that's kind of, you may not have heard those stages or those numbers that I'm kind of rattling off here, but it's a good way to kind of introduce your kids and see if they can kind of figure that out if they want. Now, this is totally, you don't have to use this as a pre-lab or kind of a discovery lab with that. You can actually go through the stages yourself and then assign this worksheet to them to kind of get a deeper knowledge of what you just went over. So it's kind of up to you on how you want to do that. Now, they will go to that Pioneer website, and like I said, that first overview right here, they can just fill in the characteristics of each of these growth stages. And then on the other worksheet right here, this one is a little bit more detailed in here. We give more space to talk about more of the main characteristics of corn at that growth stage, and then we actually have them draw a picture of that stage cycle right there. So you can end up using both the S2 and S3 and S4 worksheets, or you can use one or the other. It just kind of depends on your time frame or how deep you want your students to get into there. So those are both good that way. All right, and like I said, use it before or after what you're going to talk about. What we're going to actually look into now is we're going to talk about the stages of corn right here. And let me go ahead and advance that. Here's kind of a quick overview of those main stages in the corn growth cycle. So as you can see right here, we have VE, he's a little itty bitty, V1, V6, V9, VT, R1, and R6. These are very big main stages of those growths. Now, the cool thing is I kind of like to put this up for my students, and before I tell them what V means or 2 or R1 means, I kind of have them study the picture and come up with what do they think? What does VT probably mean? What does VE mean? What does V even mean? Or the numbers with their R. Okay, and by this time they probably know it's vegetative or reproductive growth stages. But VE stands for V emergence, and we're going to get deeper into this, and that's when that corn plant first emerges from the soil right in here. VT, one kind of neat thing to look at this right here is VT stands for vegetative stage, and it's the tassel, T for tassel. So your kids actually will probably get that one. They'll see the first emergence of the tassel right there. And then R1 and R6 right here, they probably know that this is about the time for harvest of the corn. And then they may get these numbers. These numbers kind of mean the number of leaves, but not what you kind of think. We're not counting just every leaf on the corn plant. We're looking at specific leaves that we'll talk about here shortly. So I have them show that picture, and we jump into the VE, or the emergence stage of our corn growth part here. And as we can see, we have our little corn kernel, the seed, right underground, and we're showing time evolve from left to right on here, okay? So it starts as the kernel, we see the radicle develop, the coleoptile, root system, and then finally the first leaf. And the neat thing about this is as we go through the slides, we kind of go a little bit more in detail on there. So that seed coat is also known as the pericarp, and this is a protective covering of the seed, right? Protects the embryo and the food source within the kernel. Next one up is the radicle. Now this is the first part of the corn plant that emerges or breaks through the corn kernel right there. It moves downward, okay? And that's responsible for not only anchoring the plant, but also for uptaking water and nutrients. And we have another really cool lab in Kansas Corn STEM Labs that actually does a kind of neat gravitational thing where you kind of have plants on a turntable, and we have that going, and you'll see you have the kernels orientated in different directions, and you're going to see does that radicle always grow downward? A very cool STEM activity to do there. Very fun to do. The next one we have, after the radicle, we start seeing the hypocotyl. And oh, my bad. We actually go for the coleoptile first right here on here. So the coleoptile is the first thing that actually emerges from the soil. It's a protective sheath that kind of protects that emerging corn plant or the stalk of the plant right there, the shoot. Then actually I have it labeled right here, the hypocotyl. The hypocotyl is in between the coleoptile and the radicle. It's kind of this area right here, and this is where a lot of the roots are going to start shooting out from and growing from, is that area, the hypocotyl area. And then of course, from that hypocotyl area, we do have the root system right here. And that root system, again, roots, they uptake water, nutrients, they help anchor that plant in the ground. Remember, these guys are going to get 6, 8, 10 feet tall here, so they really need a good anchoring system into the ground, especially in places like the Midwest where we have a lot of wind and things like that. And then last couple right here, we have the epicotyl. Now, this is the part that is found inside that coleoptile. That coleoptile is protecting this. And this epicotyl will actually start forming the leaves and the stems of the corn plant. And then we eventually find our first leaf. Now, this is the first true leaf right here. And the cool thing about this leaf is it's going to have a rounded tip, okay? All other leaves that come from there are going to have a nice pointed tip. But that first one, you can definitely identify it as the first leaf by having a nice rounded tip on there. And here's kind of a corn plant from the field. This is like a V2, meaning it has 2 leaf collars that we'll kind of see right here. Actually, this looks more like a V1, I would say. And you can see that we have some labels. So if you kind of want a real-world example of what we just went over right here, we have the labels right in here. And you can use this as a quiz for your kids. You can just blank out these key terms right there. Cool thing is, too, there is a neat little short video on seed germination done by Kansas STEM. And you can click this link right here, and it's really kind of cool. They have a clear plastic cup, and they have soil, and they have the corn seeds in there, and you're actually watching a time-lapse video of how, actually what we just showed right here, you're seeing the radicle come out, you're seeing the coleoptile move out through the soil as well. Very cool time-lapse video. So right here on this slide, what we actually have is another quick video on how we actually determine the growth stage of our corn plants. And it's something we use, a method we use called the leaf collar method, okay? So this video, it's about 4 minutes long, and it has, it's from the Egg PhD guys, and they're out there. They have, I mean, hundreds of videos out there. And any information you want to know about corn, they actually definitely go ahead and talk about it. But they actually go through how we identify this growth stage of our corn. And it's due to leaf collars. So as that corn emerges through the soil, and as those leaves start popping off like this, what happens is they kind of fold over and they form a little collar, right? You'll be able to see that collar, and we'll actually get an example of that here later in this talk of the corn collars. And we'll actually go through and count some of these, okay? So when you see an actual collar develop on a leaf, that would be V1. If you see 4 leaves with a collar, then you're at the V4 stage, and so on and so forth there. All right, again, I'm just going to show this picture just as we had some background information. We're going to go through those vegetative stages and into the reproductive stages right here. All right, so VE, I've already kind of talked a little bit about this. Again, that coleoptile, it's a weird word. I needed someone to help me say it multiple times to go through, but that's breaking through the soil. Now, when a farmer plants their corn seeds in there, it can take easily 2 weeks to develop. It really depends on the ground temperature. Again, if you want to explore this more, go to the Growing Degree Days on Kansas Corn STEM. But under ideal conditions, if we have a nice warm ground temperature, we can see emergence within 5 days. Pretty easy there. Okay. The next one here is that V1, that first collar is starting to develop and show that leaf kind of popping over, developing that little shirt collar on there, and really kind of hard to distinguish from the emergence stage right here, but we do see that collar on that first leaf. Now we can look at V3. Again, that means that we have 3 leaves that are demonstrating a collar from the stalk of our corn. And really what's happening is a lot of that growth is still happening below the soil into that root system and into the crown of the corn right there. 3 collars are present, as I mentioned, and this is kind of interesting. So in the V3 stage, which is a very young stage for a corn plant, all of the leaves and the ear shoots, which actually determines how many ears of corn are on the plant, that will ever be produced are actually forming right now during this stage right here from the V3 to V5. Okay. Then we move on to V4 and V9. We're starting to see some pretty good growth in these. So again, 7 to 9 collars on our leaves. And what we're actually looking at right here is the number of kernel rows, right, on our corn. And actually I can pull that right out here. The number of rows, which we can kind of look right in here if we count just around, and we will do that in our ear of corn dissection here in just a bit. You count that number of rows. During that V7 to V8 stage, that is when those numbers of rows are being determined, okay? And actually at the V9 stage, we're actually seeing the tassel begin to develop as well. And it's really kind of interesting because it's about halfway through. If we were to pull this corn plant out and cut it down from top down to the bottom vertically, we could actually see the tassel being formed in the center of that corn plant right there. We can see it being developed. And then eventually it will rise out. So our V10 to V15 stage, again, 10 to 15 collars. This is where real rapid growth starts happening. So we're seeing new leaves every 2 to 3 days during V10. When it hits V15, we're having a new leaf every 1 to 2 days. And it's really important to know that these plants are getting really big, again, 6, 8, 10 feet tall. They're trying to develop that ear of corn, that biomass that we use for fuel, both for human consumption and for ethanol. And so a lot of energy goes into producing that. And we have to remember that the leaves of a corn plant are the solar panels to the corn plant, all right? They're the ones absorbing that sunlight from the sun right there and turning that into energy. So we might, during this time, start to see that tassel kind of emerge or tip out right there. And then V16 to V18, we're starting to see silking from the ear. Well, actually, it's beginning. We can't really see that right now. Silking will actually be about 1 week away right here. So those little silks on the outside of the ear of corn are starting to develop. And really, once those fully mature and develop, that's when we can actually start making our ear of corn, or the corn cob. All right, so this is where things get really, really interesting. We got the VT, or the tasseling. The tassel at the top is fully visible. That's what includes all the pollen of the corn plant right here. And here's the problem though. Because that tassel is up there and it has the pollen, it is very susceptible to wind damage, hail damage, or any types of storms because actually the corn plant has not been pollinated yet. It has this weak window where we have a tasseling effect, but the ear of the corn, those silks aren't quite ready yet, where it's very susceptible. If the corn plants go at this stage, there's really not much to recover from after that. All right, so we have our R1 silking stage. And this is when, again, the silks become fully visible outside the corn right here. And it is the silks that actually end up catching the pollen from the tassel and transferring or transporting that pollen down to the ovule, right, which is the kernel before it becomes the kernel right here. So once that pollination happens of the ovule, then we actually have the kernel of corn. And the really cool thing about the silks are every piece of corn kernel has a silk to it, right? So each silk catches the pollen, it's transferred down into ovule, and then we have a corn kernel, right? And it takes about 2 to 3 days for that fertilization to happen. And what we end up seeing is as that corn kernel develops, we get into the R2 stage. So I might want to back up right here. That R1 stage is the silking, R for reproduction, right, or the reproductive stage. So this is the first stage in that. The second stage here is the blistering, right? Our corn kernels are actually going to swell up, and they're going to actually look like blisters. They're white. They're not like yellow like you kind of think of a corn kernel. So what's happening is they have a lot of moisture in there, right? A lot of water content, almost 85% of it is moisture right in there, okay? And then we have some starches and everything else. But this is where the kernels are starting to accumulate that matter, right? That energy, that feed that we use to eat. All right, the corn cob is developed to the full size during this stage. And then R3 is the milk stage, right? This is where we start to see those kernels turning pale yellow from that white thing. We're seeing that inner fluid, now instead of just being very watery, 85% moisture. We're starting to see it turn milky. We're getting sugars developed and even some starches developed from that. The silks are drying out, right? They're coming darker brown, right? Or even brown, deep brown with that. And this is the stage where actually our sweet corn is harvested. And harvesting sweet corn is a pretty cool, fascinating thing to see. What happens is there's a small time window where the sugar content in the kernel is sweet, right? Otherwise, what happens is if you leave that ear of corn on the corn plant for too long, that sugar is going to start transforming into starch, okay? And starch isn't as sweet as sugar. So they have this small window in which they usually hand pick these. They go through and they just chop off all the ears of corn from the plants. They got to put the ears of corn on ice. They got to be really cold so they stop that process from the sugars turning into the starch. That's why a lot of times you might see sweet corn in the refrigerated aisle of your grocery store. And also, too, that sweet corn, you might notice, it might not be that deep yellow. Some of it still has, again, as we said, it's kind of that whitish yellow color even to it. Then R4 is the dough stage, because as I mentioned, after that milk stage, once that sugar is transforming or being converted into starch, we are starting to see more of a starch content mixing with a little bit of the moisture that's left, and we're getting a nice dough consistency. It's just a white fluid right here. And what's happening is that blistering from R1 stage with all that moisture is because that moisture is being converted and being taken up by the starch and everything, we're starting to see the corn kernel dent a bit, right? It's kind of deflating and denting. And we don't get that full denting until the R5 stage, the reproductive 5 stage right here, and we call that the dent stage, right? Kernels are dented in, and a lot of the moisture is kind of coming out of there, and moisture is coming out of it's actually starting to, the drying of the ear of corn is going from the top of the corn of the cob down to the bottom. Okay, and again, those kernels are denting. And then this is R6 is when we say that it's at its physical maturity right here. What's actually happening is this is the maximum dry weight. So those corn kernels went from 85% moisture down to maybe about 16% moisture within that. So, and you'll notice this, you'll see, and I want you guys to kind of see here too, that it's 55 to 65 days after the silking. So it's about a month and a half, 2 months after they've been fertilized and everything. And you're probably wondering, when you go across fields, the corn plants are looking dried out. And they're like, why aren't they getting it? Why aren't they harvesting it yet? They're waiting for that maximum dry weight, that 15% moisture content in the kernels before they harvest that. And we want a low moisture content because we want to be able to store our corn for long periods of time. Okay. So that kind of concludes lesson 1, in which we go over the corn stages. It is very kind of PowerPoint talk heavy a lot of times with that. It really helps if you have a corn plant with you or going out into a cornfield. But we do have some videos that we shared with you right here, as well as you can make this a web quest for your kids too, as well, for them to actually go and explore those stages. So lesson 2 right here is the Explore an Ear of Corn lab, okay? So this is kind of a fun one. You get your kids into groups of 3, 4, 5, or however you want to do groups, right? You give them each, it depends on your resources, but if you give each group maybe 2 or 3 ears of corn, they can actually explore it. And we have this worksheet right here, which is S5 in our PDF file for you guys. This actually walks them through kind of the lab process of exploring the ear of corn. So one of the things that are kind of neat is when you look at this corn, notice like you see the denting of those corn kernels. So we know that this is in the R5, right? The dented stage, or well, past R5, right? These have been harvested, obviously. So this is the R6 stage, so you can ask them what corn stage that is. You can also ask them, remember in that like V5 or whatnot stage, we're starting to see the rows of corn develop right here. And you can ask them, like, go ahead and count the number of rows of the corn cob that we have here. And different species will have different numbers of rows of corn. And when you look at the different species of corn, we have ears of corn that are very long and maybe thin with small numbers of rows. And we have ones that are very kind of small and kind of thick and squat, with them with a larger number of rows of corn kernels. So it depends on the species with that. So as we're kind of pointing out here, you want to give them that Explore an Ear of Corn student worksheet, hand that out to them, give them however many ears of corn you have. and just kind of have them go through the worksheet and explore this. Now, one of the things too here is they can actually go in and they can pop a few of these kernels off, right? And one of the things we want to ask them is, well, how much does an individual kernel weigh? Okay, so you can have your little scale, and from that scale you can put one corn kernel in there, and you're going to see, okay, in this case it says 0.33 grams. All right, now what's neat to say is, why don't we try another? Let's see how different another corn kernel is. Okay, 0.33. Hey, that's pretty consistent. Let's see if I can't find a good one. What you want to ask your students is, are they all 0.33 grams? This one's 0.34. So one of the neat things we talk about in math and in the sciences is the law of averages, right? So if we really wanted to find the true weight of a corn kernel for this ear of corn, we would want to put multiple corn kernels onto our scale, right? In this case, we got 4, 5, 6, 7 corn kernels, and the total weight is 2.29 grams. So if we take 2.29 grams, divide it by the number of kernels, in this case 7, we can come to a closer or truer value for the corn kernel, and not just relying on one corn kernel for the numbers that you get. Now you can do a little bit other math in right here. So if that's the case, we know that a bushel of corn weighs about 56 pounds. It is 56 pounds. And from this, if we know that 7 corn kernels weigh 2.29 grams, how many kernels would we have in a bushel that weighs 56 pounds? So you can do some interesting math conversions, some dimensional analysis looking through this. And then there are some reflection questions going on here. What are some things that may have altered these ears of corn? We know that there are pests out there, drought, right? Too much water in here, even floods, right? What stage are they in? I kind of mentioned that before. And just kind of explore, again, how many rows. And maybe have some kid, you know, sometimes students really like those repetitive tasks to put them to. You'll have some kid that will probably go through and count every kernel on their ear of corn here. Or you can have one kid count all the kernels, and you can have another kid try to estimate the number of kernels, where they count the number of kernels in one row, multiply by that by the number of rows of the ear of corn, and see how close they get by that kind of estimating math right there. All right, so one of the other things I kind of wanted to show you during the stage right here is, if you notice, there's attached to this worksheet, at the very last one, the third page, this is S6, we actually have the corn student worksheet in which we have a outline of a corn plant right here, and we kind of have some key terms that you can put out. So you can ask them, hey, what are these labels pointing to? And these are the key words here in the bold, like the roots, we have the stalk, the ear, the kernel. We're looking at silks, tassels, the husk, and the shank. So you can give them those key terms and they can go find this. They can do this either by exploring the internet. There is another video actually that Kansas Corn STEM has done that has someone going over, right, the different parts of the plants. And actually, just as a treat, we got a nice big corn plant with us here today. So I'm going to go grab that and we can point some of those out right now. So again, on our student worksheet, worksheet S6 right here, we're wanting to label the main parts of the corn plant. And we do have a corn plant with us here today, right? Harvested from the field just this morning. Okay, and if we go, we'll just work from the bottom up right here. So down here at the bottom, we have the roots of the plant, and you can see them kind of all coming out of the big clump of dirt right here. But you'll notice also that there's something else that looks like roots right in here. They're thicker, right? And they're kind of above the ground. And you're not really used to, like, that doesn't sound like roots. You always know of roots as being these little thin kind of thready fibers moving throughout the soil. But these are actually called brace roots. And again, with these getting really as tall as they are throughout the Midwest, they got to survive that whole windy weather storms and stuff, big rainstorms and thunderstorms. So they got to really anchor themselves into the ground. And these brace roots are there to do that. And they're pretty cool. Yeah, they're nice and thick. We have the stalk of the corn plant going up here, okay? We have the ear of corn. It's very little, right? It's still developing, still maturing. Just like we talked about, if you look at the silks, they're still kind of that nice yellow color, and we're seeing them start to brown right here a little bit, but still kind of at that young stage. And whoop, let me bring this down. We're seeing the tassel right on top. So remember, the tassel is what contains the pollen, and I don't know if I can kind of hit this. You can kind of see the pollen. It's all over my car. You can see the pollen drop. That pollen can drop down here, and each pollen is going to be captured by the silks of the ear of corn, and that pollen is going to be transferred or transported down to the ovule, right, which develops into the kernel of the kernel. So just kind of again, we have the stalk running up here. We got the tassel on top. We got the ear of corn with the silks. We have the husk is this leaf-like structure that's protecting the ear of corn. And then the shank is the very bottom part of the corn right here that's attached to the stalk of the corn plant. We have the leaves, okay? And right in here, I'm going to kind of come up a little bit closer. Right in here, that whole leaf collar stage, you can see this is a nice collar on this plant right here. So as the leaf develops, it's going to fold over and it's going to produce that little shirt collar. And that's how we identify what stages, growth stages that the corn plant is in, okay? And we'll look at that in lesson 3 within this lab. So other thing to point out, you can see within that collar, you can kind of see that from the stalk, there's kind of a little bulging out area right there. That's a node right there. That's another way to determine the growth stages of corn plants. One other thing I kind of like to point out is all the leaves are very pointed right here. So we have pointed leaves. Every leaf after that first one is very well pointed. And this one's grown enough to where we can't see that first leaf developed anymore. That first leaf, the first couple, 3 or 4 leaves get pushed down here as that corn stalk grows up. So one of these probably was the first leaf at one time. Okay. So yeah, those are the parts of the corn plant. Again, there's other really good diagrams on the internet, or you can go to that link that you see in the bottom left corner for kind of another video of this. Okay, so yeah, we just talked about the different parts of the corn plant. We kind of went through and explored our ear of corn for the second lesson. And as you can see on the right side of our PowerPoint right here, you're kind of seeing that there are some worksheet questions that you as a teacher can know. You can ask your students kind of as a review question to make sure that the kids are understanding this lesson right here. So here's some pretty good review questions and the worksheet questions as well. We are going to move now on to lesson 3. Okay, and lesson 3 is the leaf collar method. And with this one, we have another worksheet. Okay, so here's the leaf collar method. We have talked a little bit about this. We talk about the vegetative stages, and during those vegetative stages, we talk about V1, V3, V6, right, all the way to VT, V tasseling, vegetative state tasseling here. So the number after the V dictates how many leaves on that corn plant have a collar. And again, I'm just going to bring our corn plant over right here. That collar happens when that leaf folds over and develops this kind of thickened little collar area here, just like a shirt collar, okay? So if you have 3 leaves with those defined collars, you're going to have a V3 plant, or a plant at the V3 stage. So this kind of goes through talking about the different stages here and how to look at them, and then it actually has a procedure for the lesson. Now I did outline right here on our PowerPoint that students will be working with cutting utensils, so find a student that you maybe trust a little bit more than the others, or just make sure that they're being really safe with these cutting utensils as they're cutting down the corn stalk. Now there is this worksheet right here, so this is kind of the front, gives you the procedures, okay? And then after that, kind of here's our reflection question right here. So it's telling you what to do, and then we have our questions that you're actually looking for. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get a pre-cut corn plant, and I'll kind of go over the procedure for what we're doing with that and actually look at some of the characteristics for the leaf collar method. All right, so we're here continuing lesson 3 on the Explore Corn Lab, in which we're actually looking at the leaf collar method for determining the growth stages of corn. Okay, you can see the corn plant right here in front of me. It has already been cut through and through, right down the middle. So from the top of the plant, actually down to the base of the plant. And actually I recommend going from the base of the plant up to the tip or the tassel of the plant if you can. Now you're going to be using like anything available to you, but kind of a razor blade or a utility knife can work really well for this, but you really want your students to be careful as you do this with it. So make sure they go slow, make sure they're stabilizing that corn plant, maybe some other students, so that the other student with the utility knife is working their way through. Again, go slow. I was going a little fast, and actually I wasn't cut by the utility knife, but I actually was probably got a paper cut type of a thing from the leaf right here. So do go slow with this. Doesn't take too long. Again, kind of go from the base all the way to the tip, cut it in half, and you can see now that you're seeing these little indentations right here. You're seeing where there's darker areas and it's kind of a little bit bulging out from that corn stalk right here. These are called the nodes. Now remember, up until this point, we've been determining the growth stage of a corn plant by the leaf collar method, right? In which we're actually looking at the collars of leaves and counting the number of leaves with collars, and that's the growth stage. But this is another really good way of determining the growth stage here, is by counting the nodes within the plant. So again, you have to dissect the plant to do this. And the reason why it's so important to do look at the growth stages of this by looking at the nodes inside is because as that corn plant grows, okay, what's going to happen is those first 4 leaves, right, V1, V2, V3, V4, are going to be pushed down as that plant grows taller and taller, right? So what happens is these first 4 leaves disappear, okay, and because they disappear and that growth point is down here into the crown, right, into the base of the corn stalk. I'll bring this up over here a little bit more. So this is the base. So down into the crown, because we lost those 4 leaves, okay, the first 4 nodes are down here into the crown of the plant. So that first node that you see above ground, okay, is probably V5 most likely, okay? So we have to start at V5 with the nodes, and again, we're looking at these darker areas, these more kind of bulged out areas on the sides right here, and we just count them, right? So we got 1 node here, 2 nodes, I'm going to bring this over here, 2, so we're at V5, V6, V7, V8, let me bring this down, V9, okay? We're looking at V10, V11 right here, and you're going to notice this is where this is also the attachment point of our ear of corn, okay? And I kind of ended up slicing through that ear of corn. Kind of neat to kind of go through that and see. And again, look at the nice silks right here. So where was I? I was at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, V12, V13, V14, and actually after that V14, well, we do have a leaf with a collar right there, so maybe that's a V15 right here would be best to describe. And actually it's kind of neat. As you cut through, you can see these other leaves developing on the inside right here. So you're seeing these other kind of pre-nodes, if you will, of the developing corn plant. So we counted those nodes. We're at 15 nodes, so this would be at the V15 stage. And actually we're entering into the reproductive stage, right? So this grew to 15 leaves. We're at the reproductive portion because we are actually starting to see our silks right here. Now these aren't fully mature quite yet, silks are not fully elongated, and we did have a tassel on this plant. So we did move past the VT stage and we're moving into the reproductive stage with that. And that would have been probably a good first point to point out before we even started this. You see the ear of corn, you see the tassel, you know that you're in the reproductive stage or the beginnings of that reproductive stage. But yeah, just cut down the middle of your plant, count all these nice little indentations right here, these darker colorations on your plant, and that can help you to determine the the growth stage of your corn plant. Now, one really cool thing then is look at these nodes and then kind of go down them and look at your leaf collars. Again, here's another leaf right here. So this is one node right in here, and you can see that this is the ear of corn leaf, right? It hasn't developed a collar because it's actually right here protecting that ear of corn. Let's go down to the next one. You can see that this one right here has a well-defined collar on it, and there's a node right here. So each node, right, should denote a collar on the leaf right here of the corn plant. So if you're counting the leaf by the leaf collar method, if you're counting the inner nodes inside the corn plant, you should get really close to the growth stage using either way. The only problem is with the leaf collar method, remember, as the plant gets bigger, those first 4 leaves are going to be gone already. They're pushed down. They've already deteriorated, probably part of the soil right now. And just remember when you're counting those nodes that the first 4 are within that base of the stalk or the crown of the stalk. And the first one that you see will be your V5 stage right there. And that kind of concludes the leaf color method of our lab right here, lesson 3 on Explore Corn. So again, compare the nodes to the leaf colors. We have some reflection questions on this lab as well. Okay, and then the last part of this is you might want to be able to give an exit ticket with your students, or maybe use some of these questions the next class period just to kind of revisit some of these questions for them and reinforce those questions. So really the main things that we want to look for after this lab is what are like some of the major stages with stages of growth within a corn plant, right? That emergence, right? The tasseling, maybe R1, R2, R3, right? Going to the milk stage where we're harvesting our sweet corn, or R6 where you see most of the corn. Again, 60%, over 60% of that is that dent corn, that field corn that's going out to feed livestock and everything, okay? Again, how long has it been around? 7,000 to 9,000 years. We talked about that a bit. Top uses of corn. This is really good. And again, on the Kansas Corn STEM website, they have a nice poster right there that shows all the different uses. It's in color. It's really great. That's also going to be used in some of our labs here. And then how many kernels are on the ear of corn? Again, that's 600 to 800. And then the leaf color method, right? How do you determine that, which we just did, right? We were kind of seeing that there was 15 nodes, right, or V15, but we knew that it was in the reproductive stage because of our ear of corn, the underdeveloped silks, and the tassel at the top. And then, yeah, what are some things to look out for that can impact corn growth? Definitely pests, droughts, water. When we talk about water, we're talking about overwatering or flooding, right, with that. And just storms, too, especially out in the Midwest. So that kind of concludes our Explore Corn lab right here. Again, there's an introductory part, and then there's 3 lessons in which we look at the corn growth stages, we explore an ear of corn, and we dissect an actual corn plant as well. So it's been fun. Again, my name is Chris Remmich, lead teacher for Kansas Corn Seed to STEM program, and thanks for being with us.